Dragons, and welcome back to Drexel Update on Inside Ambition. My name is Eva, and today I'm here with Brandon Martinez and Liz Pham from Ain't That Something podcast show. But before we get started, I wanted to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe down below to our brand new YouTube channel. And to stay most up to date on our information, make sure you follow us on Instagram at inside_ambition. Now, let's get started. Hi, Brandon and Liz, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is going to be a really exciting segment. So just to get started, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and a little bit what your podcast is about?
Liz, how about you go first?
All right, I'm Liz Pham. I am the co-host of the Ain't That Something podcast. I am a fourth year accelerated degree student in communications and PR.
I'm also a communications and PR. I am a fourth year graduating senior. And so I will be graduating with my dual BA and MS in public communication this coming spring. So it's pretty exciting about that. Our podcast is essentially a free therapy. As simple as that sounds, we started this podcast as like an interview show. Well, I started as an interview show, and then believe it or not, my first 3 episodes were me just trying to figure out who I wanted to have as a co-host. And Liz blew it out of the park. She was already a friend of mine, so but this brought us totally closer together, and we use this podcast as a platform to express how we are feeling and express our deepest thoughts, both good and bad, because it's 21st century, it's 2021, and we can't be happy all the time.
Yeah, our brand has kind of evolved since then. I think Brandon initially told me when I was a guest on the show, the podcast was mostly like a way to connect with his friends and build closer relationships, especially during COVID. But now, like it transformed into like free therapy. As we brought on more guests, we found out how they liked our podcast just to talk about some of their problems being a college student that necessarily they don't get to talk about with other people. And I really appreciate that, because I think these issues need to be expressed and aired and not be so taboo.
It's important to show the transparency.
That's so great. Thank you so much. I can hear the passion behind what you're doing in your project. So what's the significance between your podcast name and how did you jump into that podcast world? It's such a big market right now.
So originally, this podcast was called The Last Call with a man named Armand. He graduated last year and he needed somebody to take over his show, And so he said, Brandon, I like the way you talk and carry yourself. So would you like to be on would you like to take over my podcast? I was like, absolutely. But is it okay if I make it my own? And he said, you can do with it whatever you want. I need a predecessor. And I was like, predecessor?
Yes.
Yeah, predecessor, is that the right word? No.
I
need a successor.
There we go.
So I said, absolutely. So what happened was I was thinking about different kind of names for like a long time. And I was like, you know what? Whatever happens, happens. And I was thinking about it. How many times have you ever had an ain't that something moment? Like when you're sitting there and you see like a squirrel grab a piece of toast from the trash can and run across the street. Ain't that something? So I started out this podcast with just interviewing some different friends and just trying to get that ain't that something moment out of it. But then it like transformed to what it is now, where we're hardcore mental health and self-love.
That's great. So what's your ain't that something moment that you've had recently that has been like your favorite one?
Liz, you want to go first?
Oh gosh. I think the last podcast we recorded was with our friend Gab Dondici, and like I mentioned earlier, that our Ain't That Something moment didn't really happen on the podcast, but like afterwards, me and Brandon kind of reflected how much our brand has changed and how much of an impact we have made. It may not show in numbers of viewership, because me and Brandon always make a joke about how we're quote unquote successful, or how debatable our success is. But I think on a personal level, we have been really successful with our podcast. Like the people we bring on an interview seem to like really like the opportunity to speak about their feelings. And I've noticed personally myself throughout our 2 seasons we have recorded, my articulation and verbal articulation has gotten so much better. So there have been like smaller wins for us, not necessarily shown in our analytics, but
and for me, I think during the podcast, I got sober during the latter half of our first season. And so my ain't that something moment was like, wow, like I really use this platform to talk about how I'm feeling and connect my personal issues to other people, because it wasn't just me that was going through it. It affected everybody else around me. So like it increased my relationship with Liz and then the people that were on our team. So that's most definitely an ain't that something moment, like, wow, this podcast helped me get sober. Ain't that something?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And you know what? You say debatable success, but I've listened to your podcast and I think it's amazing. And hopefully, from seeing this, people will listen more. Now, speaking of your podcast episodes, some of your quarantine episodes featured some Red Lobster rolls baking, macaroon baking. Do you have any other,
Whoa.
do you have any other future plans to incorporate some other of your talents into your podcast?
See, that would require other talents. So no, well, I know Brandon has a band that he wanted to revamp. I don't know.
So I have a band from high school. We were called St. Perry's Way. It's based off of the street I was on, but I think it'd be really cool to get them on the show, and that would just be like just kind of like my two different worlds coming together. But that'll be definitely a season 3 problem to figure out. Not a problem, but that's definitely something we can figure out during season 3. Yeah, I think in terms of our talents, we've really gotten better with articulation, as you can tell. Through this, you might not be able to tell with me actually, but and as well as our ability to be way more outgoing. Because I remember when we were first doing this podcast, we weren't very, we were pretty reserved about it. And then it took a while, but we finally got into the swings of things. So I think we're using our talents every time we record.
Yeah, we've built a dynamic, because I remember in the first season, every time we would record, we'd have to like pause halfway through and be like, what should we talk about next? I have no idea what to talk about. But I think now that we've like built our friendship outside of the podcast and with the podcast, we can easily get a conversation going. And I think our interview skills have been doing well too. Mostly Brandon. I applaud to him because he just knows how to keep me back on track, because I ramble all the time.
And I think that dynamic, like Liz says, is very important. Like you can have a co-host and you guys can be good on the show, but if you don't have that life outside of the show, then it's not going to be as good. Like your ability to connect with each other during the show isn't going to be there.
No, that's awesome. And thank you so much for coming. If dragons want to hear more, where should they go?
You can follow us on SoundCloud, on Instagram at ain'tthat_something. You can also hear us on Spotify, Apple Music, and on the tripod section on the Triangle.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dragons. That's all I have for you. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe down below. And to stay up to date, follow us on Instagram at inside_ambition. See you next week.
Bye, guys.